Let's call the meeting to order. It is 11:37. Roll call, please, Rachel. Here. Here. Thank you all for being here this morning. For chair remarks, I just want to say good morning. Thank you to Member Tornatori for putting our meetings together to talk about this issue. Because of the outpouring of concern from both sides on this issue, I consider this as much of an environmental issue as a land use issue. I requested that it come to the environmental committee so that we could answer some of the questions that have been posed. And staff and Member Tornatori thought that a joint meeting would be best to flesh this issue out. Thanks to all the staff members who helped to put this meeting together. I know it was a lot of extra work, and we appreciate all that you do for us. I thought that this was an issue that needed more information so that our members could make informed votes either for or against. I hear the concerns about loss of habitat, and I've long advocated for to stop spending so much money maintaining turf grass in our county and to consider more natural plantings along our roadways. I continue to work toward that. I hope that maybe this issue will spur us to consider ways that we can increase pollinator habitats in our county, and I believe that that is very important. I also want to thank those that took time out of their day to be here to give us information on this issue. And so with that, thank you. Tell me what. Okay. Before we move on, I'm going to appoint Member Dessart and Member Eckhoff to this committee to form quorum today.
Specifically environment.
Can I have a motion and a second, please? So moved. Second. All right. Welcome to the committee too. Thank you. So our first presentation will be from Paul Haas, our Planning and Zoning Administrative Coordinator.
In your packets, you have the proposed text amendments. I'll go over them very quickly. Currently in DuPage County, in all residential zoning districts, where you have a piece of property that is 40,000 square feet or larger, you're entitled to have 4-H projects on that property, provided that you get a 4-H certificate or you are approved as an activity. That's what the 4-H group calls those activities. And one of those activities can be beekeeping. So we do have situations in unincorporated DuPage County where people over 40,000 square feet have beekeeping activities on their properties as a 4-H. In addition, under the Illinois state statutes and the DuPage County zoning code, if you have a piece of property that is 5 acres or greater, then you are entitled to have an agricultural use on your property, provided the primary use of the property is engaged in an agricultural pursuit, such as raising of livestock or growing of crops. We do have situations in the county where people, as part of raising livestock, do also have beekeeping on their properties. The proposed text amendment would be to allow for beekeeping on properties that are less than 40,000 square feet in size. There is no minimum requirement that we are putting in. That would be on any residential property, you would be allowed to have beekeeping. You would be required to get a 4-H certificate or registration with your 4-H group for either a adolescent activity or a leader activity. In addition, we are requiring by state law that you register with the Department of Agriculture your beekeeping hives so that they can engage in inspection of the hives. We have a representative here from the Department of Agriculture to talk about that process and how you register with the state and how the inspection process moves forward. So I won't get into that, but we would require that you apply for a building permit. As part of that building permit, you submit the documents from 4-H and you also submit the documents from the Department of Agriculture. We are proposing that the number of hives be limited to no more than 2 hives on properties less than 40,000 square feet. In addition, we are requiring certain setback requirements that are similar to what we did for chickens, that the beehives be located at least 25 feet from all side and rear property lines, and they be behind the front wall of the house. So that's what we're proposing in this ordinance. We're also proposing that it be as of right, and you would not be required to apply for extraordinary zoning relief. You would just have to come in and get a building permit and provide a site plan showing where everything's going to be located, and also provide those documents from 4-H and also from the Department of Agriculture. With that, I'll turn it over to Jim Wellwood, who is an inspector with the Department of Agriculture, to discuss the statutes and also the registration process. Jim?
Still on, right? Okay. My name is Jim Wellwood. I work for the Department of Agriculture as an apiary inspector. There is a statute that went into effect in 1970. It's Illinois Bees and Apiaries Act. It's quite specific on the details that you need to follow within the state. And one of the first things is registration. There is also a form, I believe, that's up there that the beekeeper fills out, tells his name, address, GPS coordinates, and other information to help us locate these hives. So the reason that we do that is because the apiary program was started to help minimize the disease spread. There's a couple of bacterial diseases that are really, really bad. And so we do periodic inspections of hives so that we're certain that disease isn't moved between state to state and from county to county. The program has 9 inspectors, and we have different geographic areas that we cover. And I'm filling in this territory because we've had a couple of turnovers in our inspectors. So registration is voluntary, but it is required by the state statute. And the statute is quite detailed in that everyone needs to be registered, and there are also fines for not doing that. And like I already said, it's for the benefit of all beekeepers so that we can cut down on the spread of diseases.
Next, Pete Soltis is the president of the Cook DuPage Beekeepers Association. Thank you, Pete.
Good morning, everyone. Pete Soltis. Thank you for the invitation today. I am president of the Cook DuPage Beekeeping Association and here to represent those beekeepers. I began keeping bees over 50 years ago. My spouse, Kim Colton, has a company, Illinois Bee Rescue, and she removes colonies of honeybees, bumblebees, carpenter bees, even bald-faced hornets from residences, from structures and so on, when they find themselves in locations where they are intersecting with people. As such, we have over 100 colonies of bees that we manage in 18 apiary locations throughout DuPage County, Cook County, Kendall County, LaSalle County in Wisconsin and in Indiana. I just want to give a little historic perspective on honeybees. And first, I want to say I support the lifting of the ban on beekeeping on smaller properties. From a historic perspective, Dr. Michael Engel, University of Kansas, discovered fossils of honeybees in the shale plates of Nevada. Okay, this is irrefutable evidence that the honeybee has been competing with native bees on this continent since the beginning of time. Okay. And what does that mean? Well, the honeybee did not always win. In fact, when the native settlers came over and planted, or I'm sorry, when the early American settlers came over and planted their crops, they did not pollinate and did not grow well. And they had to write back to the King of England and ask him to send honeybees over to the United States. Today's honeybee has DNA of European origin, Asian origin, as well as African origin. So today's honeybee is a blend of DNA from all over the world. But the honeybee has been here competing. In the late 1940s, over 75 years ago, the number of managed colonies of honeybees in the United States reached a peak at the end of World War II at 8 million colonies. That number has steadily declined in that time, in the last 75 years, to a point now we're at about 3.5 to 4 million, somewhere in between, of managed honeybees across the United States. Okay. There have been studies conducted, 30-year studies conducted on populations of pollinators. And some of those studies have shown that our populations of pollinators have declined over 70% during that same time. So in a time when honeybee populations are declining, so too are native populations declining. That tells us the problem is not the honeybee. Okay, there's something else going on. Okay, so what's changed in the last 70 years? Number one, urbanization. We all need places to live. We all need, wonderful places to prosper. But the loss of habitat to parking lots and buildings, where there used to be prairie lands, has contributed. Radical changes in how we grow crops and produce. Okay, 98% of all crops grown in Illinois are either corn or soy. Okay, that's really, you can call that monocrop agriculture. Okay. There are over 300 million pounds of pesticides and herbicides sprayed every year on these crops. 300 million. To put that in perspective, there's roughly 300 million people in the United States. That's a pound of pesticide per person, a pound of herbicide per person that gets sprayed. And that is certainly having an effect on our environment. Explosion of pesticide use in the urban environment, where neonicotinoid embedded seeds in ornamental plants, uses of pesticides such as Sevin and Cutter, Mosquito Joe, all those types of things are having an impact on all pollinators. Okay, so some closing thoughts on my comments. Beekeepers keep bees because they find these creatures fascinating. They consider them essential in the production of locally grown fruits and vegetables. It's very important to them to be able to have bees, because they believe without bees, none of the crops will grow, just as our early settlers learned in their lesson. They also consider honey, propolis, wax, pollen, and bee venom as essential components in their daily nutrient and supplement regimen. Denying the keeping of bees is denying them their rights to self-care. That's how they think. That's how they view this. I've been a volunteer as a president for the past since 2010, and I have these dialogues with people all the time. They keep bees in their backyards with their neighbors' support, without regard, and I hate to say this, but without regard to what this county supports it, whether they support it or not. I'm saying there are already beekeepers that are keeping beehives in their backyards on small lots. Okay, they recognize societies like the Xerxes Society and the Sierra Club as paid opposition, and they will not yield to their agendas. That's just how the beekeepers think. Okay, if someone wants to keep bees and they can't keep them on their property, what do? They find a place to where they can keep them. And what the outcome of that is that's concentrating large numbers of colonies of bees in like one apiary location. Okay, so lifting this ban and supporting this proposal will allow them to register their hives, make use of state inspectors and their resources, and most importantly, distribute the populations of honeybees. Lifting this ban is not going to increase the number of beekeepers. Okay, we have a hard time getting people interested in keeping bees. The number of beekeepers has been relatively stable since I've been the president of the Beekeeping Association. So my final thoughts are, I think it's better spending of time rather than banning the honeybee, finding ways to support local organic agriculture in a pesticide-free way, growing crops and sharing with their neighbors, planting more trees and native plants, restoring prairies, and this will solve the crisis we've found ourselves in. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete, for your presentation this morning. Next, I have Connie Schmidt, who is a Group Executive Chair of the Sierra Club.
Hi, thanks for giving me a moment to speak with you. I'm not an expert. I tried to get an expert to come and talk to you. I had 24-hour notice. And so I did get 4 different experts who said we have to get permission from our supervisors, but they sent me 2 slideshows. And so I put them together to create one for you. And thank you, Craig, for helping with that slideshow. Also, thanks, Sheila, for your introductory remarks about native habitats. I totally agree. And just FYI, I've been a volunteer with Sierra Club for 50 years and most of us never get a penny paid. I'm not paid. Okay, so slide 2. We are not against honeybees. Oh, I gotta talk closer. We're not against honeybees. I like honey. I use it in many products. You can see the slide here. Honey is important to a lot of people. However, we have a little competition issue going on here. And the fact of the matter is that more than a quarter of North American bumblebees are not only decreasing in numbers, they're facing extinction. The next slide, please. So there's all kinds of different bumblebees and all kinds of bees. There's over 400 kinds that are in concern with, and some are in a lot more concern than others. But I just want you to know, we're not just worried about one bee. One bee we talk a lot about is the rusty patch bumblebee. So I will talk about that because the Forest Preserve is concerned with that. So if I refer to that, that's just so you know, it's not the only one that's of interest. Let's go to the next slide. So just like myself and Sheila and caring for the environment and myself and Jim, wanting everyone to grow a lot more native plants on a lot less public, beautiful land. Bees have a lot in common. They both forage for food and they forage from the same resource. The managed bees though, the honeybees, their residence is in a place that's provided by humans. And so we can increase that. The wild bees are dependent on our natural habitat for their nesting sites, for their overwintering sites, for their weather protection. So there are differences, and that ends up helping with understanding their survival. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. So they do compete for food. And you're going to have 2 slides in here that Craig has assured me, if you're interested, he will send the documentation to each of you that has the sites cited, the links and whatnot. But iNaturalist is a resource that a lot of us use when we are trying to identify something in our yard or where we're hiking. And in the last little over than a year, there was only 48 sightings for the rusty patch bumblebee, and then the other 2 bees even less. Let's go to the next slide. So this is kind of like the bottom line. Is there enough food for honeybees and native bees? And the real honest answer is we don't know. But a lot of people are trying to find out. And last week, in the Daily Herald, I don't know if I'm on screen, probably not, but last week in the Daily Herald, there was an article that the Forest Preserve District, our sister organization to the county board, is hiring special experts with their dogs to go in and hunt for locations of where are the rusty patch bumblebees nesting sites located. Last year, they found 7 sites. This year, they found 1. So that's probably not a real good trend. But it is interesting that that is an area of deep concern for the Forest Preserve to the point where they're doing research on it. Let's go to the next slide. Those are the sources. Let's go to the next slide. Can't read that anyway, and it makes me glaze over. Second concern is that there is a hypothesis, that research was done on it, that disease, as you said, disease is prevalent, and that's our native bee populations are being threatened by the presence of honeybees because they do sometimes bring diseases or little critters or parasites that might bother them. Let's go to the next slide. So the results of that research, and the research is cited in the upcoming slide, was that bumblebees didn't have the concerns when there was no honeybee present. When there were honeybees present, they did have some concerns. So then, there's lots more study that needs to be done. I'm sure that's not the only factor. Please go to the next slide. Conclusions. The thought is that there is an impact on native bee populations on native bee from honeybees. And honestly, both can live in harmony when we're not too dense. I mean, we've learned this with cows, that if you have too many cows in a feedlot, they spread disease and it's dangerous. For more and more upkeep has to be done to keep them safe. So we are just concerned about overpopulating. Not that people keep bees. I'm thrilled that they do. In fact, I have friends who do it secretly, but I won't tell you where. So my last remarks are, currently honeybees are allowed in unincorporated property that is zoned as industrial commercial and on residential areas if the owner applies for a special use permit and there's 5 acres. The county is considering amending this ordinance. Additional beehives will increase competition for nectar and pollen and also add stress on our native populations. We hope you will not approve the change and embrace the wonderful agricultural essence that we have currently. I would encourage that more research be done with the Forest Preserve District and with IDNR, which is not exactly the same as the Department of Agriculture. So I hope you'll look into it further. And I thank you so much for your time to talk.
Thank you, Connie, for your comments. Normally we have public comment earlier in our meeting, but because of all of the information we were providing, we decided to put it later into the agenda. But before I go to public comment, I wanted to make sure that there are, to find out if there were any members present that had questions before we did that. Liz is moving towards her microphone. Okay, thank you, Liz. All right, so next on our agenda would be public comment.
All right, please be advised, public comment will be limited to 3 minutes per person, up to a total of 30 minutes. How about now? Okay, please be advised that public comment will be limited to a total of 30 minutes, 3 minutes per person. Our first commenter is Dennis Wisnowski.
Afternoon. My name is Dennis Wisnowski. I'm a 44-year native of Naperville. I live on Donwood Drive. There are 3 objections usually to these honeybees. One, they're not native. The cook DuPage person dispelled that. They were, and they were reintroduced. I am the vice president of Will County Bees, Will Bees. We have more than 100 active members that keep bees in DuPage County, like I did at one time, and in Will County and other places. The second objection is that they displace native bees. That has not really been proven. In your last full board meeting, my associate Keith Meiser presented a paper that was written by the rust bee people that said the native bees the honeybees do not affect their population. When I first moved here 44 years ago, we had a mosquito problem on Donwood Drive. These are 3-acre lots. And since then, we don't, because the people are building giant monster houses. Mine isn't anymore, and they're using pesticides. We don't have mosquitoes. I had to move my bees to Will County because they couldn't survive on Donwood Drive. They can in unincorporated Will County. The third objection, which I'm surprised I haven't heard, is that they hurt people. They don't. They're wild animals, and even in a very small place, if you disturb a wild animal, they will fight back. If you disturb your tame dog, they will fight back. Bees do not hurt people. They fly up and they fly down to their home. What they need is natural habitat. I'm really happy that this is now before the Environmental Committee. We can replace the turf grass. We could go with more native pollinating plants. we will have an environment that can support all of the native bees and the introduced honeybees. Thank you. I, of course, approve of this change.
Thank you. Our next public commenter is Richard Rooney.
Thank you. I'm also a member of the Cook DuPage Bees. I've been keeping bees for 17 years. We have bees at our home and we have hives at the American Legion Post. We have 10 acres, which we are phasing out. Waste of time and pesticides. We don't use it all on our 10 acres. And we do see many, many kinds of bees, all kinds of bumblebees, native pollinators, as well as honeybees. So I think we have to take a nuanced approach, collaborative, involving support for all pollinators. I agree with less grass. We quit using pesticides. We don't use them at all at the Legion. We have a few dandelions. They're mowable. They don't hurt anything. On a scale of 1 to 10, they're 9 out of 10 for pollen and nectar. We've done the same at home, and we don't use pesticides. I fertilize twice a year. No pesticides, no insecticides. And I don't think we need perfectly manicured sod. We've seen an explosion of pollinators at home and at the Legion. A good thing with the Legion, just an aside, we raise the hives there and have for 17 years. And we sponsor scholarships for Eagle Scouts and seniors at the local high school. To date, we've raised $54,000 that we've given away. Habitat is the key. And if you have habitat, they come and they explode over there. We've got other things that we see like goldfinches, butterflies, and things we didn't have before. Numerous bumblebees, no deformed wing disease whatsoever. All of the bees get along, and I don't think that there's competition. We just need more habitat. A good book we have is, I'd recommend anybody look at it. It's Pollinators of Native Plants. It's got pictures of bees that go on there, what the host plant is, what they do. You can plant them, and it's a very good one. I'll be happy if anybody wanted to come over and look at the post. It's a real nice area, 10 acres right in the middle of Downers Grove and on 4,000 Saratoga. And you'll see lots and lots of native as well as honeybees, and I don't see a problem. So I'm for beekeeping. It's a safe hobby. The only time the bees will sting you is if you get in and mess with the hive. I always wear a veil, but you can work with hands-free gloves. They don't sting you. I know. Is that it? Okay, thanks.
Thank you for your comment. Our next commenter is Pete Soltez with the Cook DuPage Beekeepers. Oh, pardon. Excuse me. Our next commenter is Bill Whitney.
Hi, I'm a resident of unincorporated DuPage County for the last 33 years, a beekeeper. I'm part of the Cook DuPage Beekeeping Association, and I do have a beekeeping business. Many of these people have already said a few of these things, so I'm not going to repeat them. But I will put a perspective on here that that may be overlooked. And we're actually looking to you as a board to give us something to be proud of in our county, and to bring back to our customers, our friends, our family. Honeybees are not the villain, and they're not the savior either. They're here. That's the truth. They've been here, like Pete talked about. When they were reintroduced in the 1620s by our ancestors, or many of our ancestors. And but there's a resurgence, I talked about this last week, of people understanding that our food industry is not necessarily out for our good. You know, they're welcoming us to delicious, but they're not necessarily welcoming us to healthy. And one of the things, and I know a number of these members here were able to go to a lecture that I attended on Saturday by Dr. Ferhat Ozturk. He's a researcher from Southern Texas University, San Antonio. And he's one of the few researchers that are uncovering why honey is so valuable for the human body. Honey, little known, honey was actually for thousands of years used as a medication before it was used as a food. And so he's uncovering that. There's some really astonishing properties about honey. Why is honey healing wounds that modern medicine cannot address? And he was able to show data. He was able to show photos. He was able to give actual information that they've uncovered. And they've studied hundreds of honeys. And so you say, well, you can just get honey at the grocery store. One of the studies that they showed, listing the properties of honey, like the antioxidant aspect to it, or blanking on the word, but anti-inflammatory aspect. And so they took 100 honeys from local beekeepers in Texas, and then they went to the grocery stores and took honey that was labeled as not organic, but raw honey. And it wasn't that the grocery stores were bad honey. It's just that they grafted much lower on all those properties, and they discovered that local honey that's raw has these properties that we're looking for.
3 minutes have elapsed. Please conclude your comment.
Thank you very much, and become our advocates. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Our next public commenter is Nadine Roram.
Got a timer going here. I'm Nadine Roram. I'm an ecology professor at Wheaton College. And I just had a few comments and questions. I guess my first question, and perhaps I need to be reading other places, is what's the rationale or the science behind the proposed regulations that the beekeepers are not comfortable with? Being an ecologist, I do a lot of research and reading. And so before this meeting, I did a lot of reading, and I'd be glad to leave these papers with you. Some of the conclusions and things that we're hearing are based on research in various locations and at times that are prior. These papers are from 22, 23, 2020, 2024. So they're recent. Yes, honeybees do compete with other bees. That's a given. But these assumptions that are being made that the nest sites are being outcompeted, and I believe, as we heard, there does need to be more research. So my question is, until we have more research, I think we could just allow people to have these hives in their yard for a variety of reasons. First of all, I don't think we have a density issue. Do we have a commercial beehive situation in our county that has thousands and thousands and thousands of hives? I don't think we do. I could be wrong on that. The second thing is, again, they do compete, but the situation is much more nuanced. If you're an ecologist of any sort, you know that ecology is complicated. Thirdly, I believe allowing more people to be beekeepers would actually promote the establishment of the habitat that we need, as was said earlier by other people. And this most recent paper, Floral Resources Used by the Endangered Rusty Patch Bumblebee in Midwestern United States. I've seen a rusty patch out at our friends. We've found them, or friends have observed them. They're beautiful. This paper is all about the right plants at the right time of the rusty's life cycle. Is there anything in this paper about competition from honeybees? No. I'm saying they do compete, but we need to look more closely at the science for sure. So I would encourage that. And lastly, we have people nearby. We have experts, but I would like to recommend, if anyone would like to consider contacting this person, and I have consulted them to see if I could share their name. This is a new professor that's arrived from Virginia, Dr. Perry Keatsman from Olivet Nazarene. Her webpage, besides her work page, it's called cellophanewings.com. She's an insect ecologist. She specializes in pollinator conservation for sustainable ecosystems. She's done a lot of agricultural work. And she's also been a beekeeper since she was 12.
3 minutes have elapsed. Please conclude your comment.
Yeah.
Thank you. Our last public commenter is George Stickles.
Was observing that it seemed like a lot of legislation restricting the public comes from misinformation. And this is something I've witnessed in the last year. I live in DuPage County, Hanover Park, and I'm the guy with the yard with the flowering plants, and I witnessed that native bees as well as honeybees feeding on my plants up until the time that I get issued a citation because my plants are too tall and I have to cut them down. So I think the issue is habitat and not honeybees restricting the ability of the natural bees to feed.
Thank you. That concludes public comments.
Thank you to all. So this is an informational only meeting, but I am going to read this discussion item. The T-124 text amendments to the DuPage County zoning ordinance to approve the following zoning petition T-124, the proposed text amendment to the DuPage County zoning ordinance relative to beekeeping. The ZBA vote was no recommendation. And in the development committee, I have 7 ayes and 0, or maybe that was I'm sorry, that was the ZBA for no recommendation, 7 ayes, 0 nays. And in our development committee, we had 4 ayes, 1 nay, and 1 absent. So we remanded this issue to the joint meeting of the County Development Committee and the County Environmental Committee. And because of this robust decision, now discussion, we can move this back to the to County Board under the Development Committee reports next week. So again, last opportunity for any questions or comments. Member Garcia.
Thank you. I don't know if one of our experts would be able to answer this. I mean, we keep hearing that it's habitat. We're missing habitat for the bees. Do the native bees, do they feed off or do they pollinate the same flowers? That's what I'm not quite sure of. I don't know. Somebody.
Thank you. I think one of the woman that gave the public comment actually addressed or spoke to that, is that with what you're calling native bees, they're very plant specific, very species specific. And that's one of the reasons why loss of habitat has been so detrimental, because things we consider weeds that we would pull are important to that little tiny mason bee. And they only can travel in 100-yard radius. Okay. Whereas if you want to compare it to a bumblebee or a honeybee, honeybees and bumblebees, they will travel great distances and can collect great amounts of pollen. They are more specialists. I've been in fields where there are hundreds of acres as far as the eye can see of canola, and the honeybees are out collecting the canola. And right next to the beehive is dandelion. And I have a picture of it. I didn't know I could be doing a PowerPoint, but it shows on the dandelion a longhorned bee feasting on the dandelion. Okay, so in this world where the honeybees are the hungry linebackers, the teenage sons that raid the refrigerators and starve everyone out, that's not how it works. The smaller, lesser known insects need to have a very specific type of plant to their diet. And there's not a lot of research that's done on that, but that fact is understood. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that does answer my question, because it just seems like it's 2 different habitats that they're using. And so we just need to reconfigure our thinking on that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Paula.
I see it. So I appreciate your question, because some honeybees and some native bees do pollinate and feast from the same plant. One thing that happens though with the bumblebees, they are the ones who are able to do, it's called buzz pollination, where they are the ones who help our tomatoes, our green peppers, our blueberries, eggplants, a lot of the vegetables that we eat are not pollinated by honeybees. They are pollinated by, they need the bumblebees. They need these kind of bees. So for our nutrition, you know, our biggest crops in Illinois, soybeans and corn. That's wind pollinated, doesn't need any insects. And I know that honeybees do pollinate some crops like almonds, and they're actually, the hives are transported to different areas to help the farmers to do that. I don't think we have too much almond stuff going on in DuPage County, but we do have a lot of vegetable gardens, and it is those native bees that do pollinate our native gardens.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to, at the interest of time, I'm going to move on to questions from our committee. Thank you. Liz, did I see your hand go up or was it Dawn? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dawn.
All right, thank you. I just have a couple of comments, actually. One is from one of my constituents named Sue. She reached out to me and asked me why other entities weren't invited to this discussion. I know it's not your fault, but like the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. So others expressed frustration that more entities with an interest in this topic weren't invited, but we could spend another 3 hours on the topic. I know. I have done more research on this topic than in the last 2 weeks than, you know, I really did have time for. A couple of observations. Number one, the Zoning Board of Appeals finds that they have concerns regarding native bee and non-native honeybees as species, and that they do not have sufficient information regarding the impact of non-native honey or honeybees species on native bees. So they had questions, and that's why we kind of held it out. According to research, non-native honeybees are not in peril, but they're the ones who have been given all the love and attention because people are being told that they are in peril. Bee researcher Hollis Woodward from the University of California, Riverside says people are devoting a lot of their love and attention and funding to honeybees, and that can be detrimental to the wild bees. Non-native bees were brought to America, the honeybees rather, were brought to America 400 years ago, and settlers used these new bees for honey and to make candle wax. But an article in Vox said that there are more honeybees on the planet now than ever in history, and the same cannot be said for native bees, which are considered incredibly important pollinators. I mean, I agree with the value of honeybees. I myself, instead of buying Neosporin, I use the honey as my Neosporin on wounds and such. And it really works for me. So I understand, and I appreciate, I love honey in everything, my coffee, my tea. I appreciate honeybees, but I really do believe that it's based on my research, it's the native bees that are in danger. Just a couple of comments I had. Thank you.
Thank you, John. The one thing I do want to clarify is because I have heard a lot of requests for, you know, why did we not invite the IDNR? And we did. And Paul, will you please address that just quickly?
When we started our research to vet this before the Zoning Board of Appeals, we reached out to a number of groups. One of them was the Department of Agriculture because we are aware of the statute. We also reached out to the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, IDNR. We found that IDNR is actually a subset of the Department of Agriculture, and they deferred us over to the Bureau of Land and Water with the Department of Agriculture, which is where we got Jim from. We confirmed that again just the other day that IDNR would defer everything to another subset in the Department of Agriculture, which is the Bureau of Land and Water. And that's why we have Jim here. So we did reach out to them. And once again, they deferred to Land and Water.
Thank you, Paul. If there are no more questions, I'll move on to our next item, which is old business. Any old business? Seeing none. Any new business? Any new business? Seeing none, without objection, we're adjourned.
Will be on the county board agenda.
Thank you, Sam.